Yo, what is up everybody, it's Jithy right here and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we have yet another very intriguing and contentious hypothetical matchup within the Naruto verse by the Great Six. And as you can tell the title, this is Neji versus Gaara. Is interesting the real winner? So first off, I completely agree with that statement, right? Neji versus Gaara is very interesting. And like I've said in previous videos, these hypothetical matchups that we all wished we could have seen in the tuning exams are some of the most highly debated and discussed matchups in the entire Naruto fandom, and rightfully so. One of the primary reasons for that is because of the embedded and inevitable ambiguity that revolves around these matchups due to aspects of these matchups that we simply can't definitively answer, right? So with this one in particular, Neji versus Gaara, one of the most important aspects would be defense, right? It's stated somewhere that Neji had the best defense in the tuning exams, and clearly we saw Gaara's impressive feats as well with his own defense. So that would be a very important aspect, right? I think speed is another very important aspect as well, right? Can Neji use taijutsu that is sufficient in speed to where Gaara-san couldn't keep up? I would say Gaara has a more impressive feats, right? He was able to essentially, once he was enraged at the end of the tuning exams, take out curse mark Sasuke, and the only individual that was able to stand up to Gaara was an enraged and QB amped Naruto, right? Who, by the way, is definitely stronger than the Naruto that beat Neji. But then again, I'm aware of the context of Neji versus Naruto. Neji underestimated him, right? So he didn't go all out right away, and you can make an argument that Neji could have shut down his chakra network before Naruto could even get amped. But then I would counter and say, well, the QB's chakra might make up for that shutdown in the chakra network. Again, it's all ambiguous, it's all contentious, but the point is, it is debatable. And going into this video, I do lean towards Gaara because of what we see empirically and because of him having the superior feats, like I said previously. So I'm very intrigued to see what Six has to say about this one. But before I begin, anyways, greatly appreciate it. Hit that like button, turn on bell notifications, stay up there with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, you mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, you become part of the family forever. But let's not waste any more time, screen. Let's see what Six is about this one.
Neji versus Gaara. Now, admittedly, just right off the bat, there is absolutely no narrative significance to this fight. There's nothing to imply that this would have been like the greatest fight in the tuning exams. Neji and Gaara, as far as I'm aware, they don't even look at each other throughout the entire time.
Right, there's no interaction, I agree.
On screen at all.
It was never implied.
The only reason that we're choosing to do this video is because the fight is a bit more interesting than, I think anyway, what Neji versus Lee versus Gaara was and what Sasuke versus Gaara was. Okay. Because of how Neji interacts with Gaara and his specific defenses. Now, there is a little bit of a competition between Neji and Gaara when it comes to how good their defenses are, because at least Tenten thinks that Neji's rotation is superior to Gaara's sand defense outside of the sand dome, because she had never seen that before. But yeah, so there's a little bit of competition there, but the overall fight as well is still just more interesting. I do have another one of my sun seeds and spawns, the Chromebook user himself, sadly, Truth here. Hello.
Yeah, shout out to Truth, man.
I'm glad to be here.
Truth has a YouTube channel. It's not that great. I wouldn't subscribe to it, but if you want to, for whatever reason, it is down there, and you can go click on it and watch his videos and whatnot. What video you have coming out next?
I have a Sonata video coming out soon.
Yeah, so if you like Sonata, there you can go check out Truth's video. But you want to get started? Neji versus Gaara, buddy?
Yeah, I'll start with Gaara. Basically, his whole narrative, things in the story. Basically, Gaara as a character is supposed to be someone that's above the level of Genin. He's not supposed to be a normal person like everyone, well, I won't say everyone, but most people in the tuning exams are supposed to be normal Genin trying to get to the level of tuning. People like Gaara have come out of B rank missions unscathed, no damage at all. He also has things like his sand, like basically does everything for him and doesn't need to do anything at all.
Right.
So the way his sand barrier works is that he just sits there and he pours chakra into it, and it automatically defends him, and he doesn't have to do anything outside of that, as long as nothing's fast to him. You see later when things are fast to him, clearly completely blitzes sand.
Yeah, like Lee,
What a-
Sasuke, whatever.
Right.
Gar also, he completed the Chunin exams in the fastest time ever. Now, it is worth noting, at least in the Itachi novel anyway, that Itachi did his Chunin exam solo, so he had no help. But while Gaara did have a team, like he had Tamari and Kankuro with him, they're so much inferior to him that it didn't really matter. Like you could also say Gaara did the same thing. Like he just cleared the Chunin exam solo.
Fair enough. I agree.
Tamari and
He was
Kankuro
blatantly
did
superior.
absolutely nothing for that. The only reason that they even probably got to the end, maybe not Tamari, but the only reason Kankuro got to the end is because Gaara was there. Kankuro sucks. Like I'm not giving
I
anything
agree.
to Kankuro. But you can continue. I just had to mention that. I had to.
Yeah, that's fine. Basically, when we go on to more of Gaara's scaling, it gets kind of hard, at least for base Gaara. He doesn't really do anything outside of defending against a weightless Lee, or I'm sorry, a weighted Lee, and some of weightless Lee. Whenever he does defending against weightless Lee, it's before Lee goes all out. We get the whole thing where Guy says Lee explode, and then he gets completely outmatched. Like he gets outmatched and he gets his first wound ever in battle. And then we're shown in his second ultimate defense, which is considered his true ultimate defense, his sand armor, which is basically a worse version of the sand shield, kind of what I would consider a worse version.
It's like a
Because
second
not only does it take more
inferior
chakra,
layer. Yeah.
it says it's riddled with weak points, so it's easier to break, like bust down, basically.
We don't ever get like any explanation on what Kankuro meant by weak points, do we? Like at all?
Nah, not really.
I don't believe
I
so.
don't think we do. You could kind of speculate on what the weak points might be just because of how Lee interacts with the sand. So Lee does kick the sand when he's in the fourth gate. He kicks the sand one time, like under Gaara's chin, and seemingly from that one kick, all the sand armor cracked. But then when Lee did his gigantic barrage assault, only pieces of the armor started breaking off and it didn't crack anymore. So maybe you could say like, oh, the under the chin part is a piece of Gaara's sand armor that's weak. While this is only Chunin exams in the beginning, we will go over later forms of them after this, like Gaara versus Kimimaru and Neji versus Kidomaru.
Interesting.
Those specific versions of the characters. But yeah, at least while they're in the Chunin exams, base Gaara's pretty much not doing anything to Neji. It's worth noting that Lee, even before 5th gate, before any of that, he still considers Neji to have the strongest taijutsu. He thinks the Hyuga in general just are the strongest school of taijutsu in Konoha. He mentioned this earlier whenever he was fighting with Naruto and Sasuke just before the preliminaries. He said he didn't think he was the strongest junior ninja, but that title belonged to somebody else on his team. Obviously, that person he was referring to was Neji.
Of course.
And then we get a little bit of a breakdown from Guy, Kakashi, and Lee on how the gentle fist differs from the hard fist style, where the hard fist style more focuses on bruises, breaking bones, and making your opponent bleed.
Right.
But the gentle
Precision
fist,
versus
all
power.
you really need is a
essentially.
scratch. Like you just need to hit your opponent a little bit, and it sends chakra through their chakra network and attacks your organs. And then Kakashi says this is particularly strong because, at least in Naruto, there's absolutely no way for you to strengthen your organs and train them against some sort of an attack like this. So Neji already has a form of durability negation with that. At least against everyone in the Naruto verse, don't take it to like crossverse and whatnot, where some people actually can strengthen their insides. But at least within Naruto, Neji actually does have some sort of durability negation. So to quickly talk about Hinata versus Neji, because there's
All right. I want to add this real quick before we continue further. I would like to note from my own lens that it seems the case is with Gaara's sand defense that you either need to have the speed or the AP to bypass it, right? Now, Rock Lee was able to crack, the last layer of defense that Gaara had, right, which was the sand that seems to be on the skin of his own body itself, right? So it was around the 4th or 5th gate where that started to be compromised. You see it cracking, you see the defense starting to wither away. You could argue that was a combination of AP and speed, right? The way I look at it is the first layer, which is the sand that's around him, not on his body, is able to react to a certain extent. But if you have sufficient speed, you can bypass it. and then the second layer has to protect Gaara, right? The second layer being the sand on his body itself, right? So that's the way I look at it. And I would say with the sufficient AP, you can bypass both layers. We saw that with Sasuke when he used his Chidori. Now the question is, how would the Gentle Fist interact with the sand, right? We know that an individual that doesn't have this sort of armor is at a very, very high risk of getting shut down, literally, right? If you get hit in the right organs, your chakra network will shut down and you will be compromised and you'll be essentially done, right? So the question is the Gentle Fist's AP, I know Six said a durability negator, I understand that, but would the Gentle Fist be able to negate, the sand on Gaara's body, right? That's if he can even get around the first layer of defense. But that's the way I look at it based on the narrative storyline that has been presented and based off the empirical evidence presented. Now, if it is the case that Neji's Gentle Fist will bypass the armor, right, because he just hits the organs, and despite the armor, the Gentle Fist itself bypasses the durability, then he would beat this version of Gaara. If we presuppose that Gaara doesn't go on a rampage like it did at the end of the Chunin exams. If we presuppose that shutting down his chakra network ends it, then from my lens, I would say that Neji would most likely win in this specific case, right? So it really depends how his Gentle Fist interacts with the armor. That's the primary aspect that you need to consider when analyzing and deciding who would be victorious in this one, right? Let's continue on though.
To address it, just for whoever in the comments. Now, there's obviously going to be comparisons to Lee in this video because both of them fought Lee and both of them have statements against Lee. So naturally, that's just like the best way to compare both of them to each other, at least in terms of scaling. It is worth noting that after both of their fights with Lee and after both of the comparisons, they both trained for a month to get stronger. And Gaara in particular, he kills people to get stronger.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Under the sand waterfall funeral. Now this is extremely edgy. I'm gonna read it word for word, right? But it's extremely edgy. It just sounds edgy. There's no way for me to reword this where it doesn't sound edgy. But it'll be on screen. You can read it yourself. Let's see. The bloody tears of the dead blend with the massive sand, even greater power called upon to provide carnage. A terrifying jutsu to end someone's life, squashing them after they are captured.
Brutal.
With the sand binding card.
Brutal.
The sand closes in from every direction, its pressure numbering in tons, and before long, the opponent experiences death. Their blood instantly scattered from the sand in the openings in it. Despite this cruelty, it's as if some splendid fireworks had just been shot up. A chunk of red meat returns to the ground, its crimson red blood absorbed by the sand, its strength becoming Gaara's. So it just says a few times in there that Gaara basically gets stronger from killing people. And we know between his fight with Lee and Sasuke at least, he killed 2 Jonin in the hallway in front of Shikamaru and Naruto. And he killed Dosu when Dosu tried to confront him because Gaara doesn't sleep.
Correct.
So Gaara got stronger, and then we see Neji training his rotations with Tenten
as well
in the forest in between those 2 fights. So they both get stronger from there. So that is a fair point. But there's still some comparisons you can make that just make it make sense, right? So Sasuke is directly compared to Weightless Lee, and you would get the implication from some people. They would tell you that this guy's statement where he says that in terms of speed Lee can't be surpassed is referring only to Weightless Lee, when the context doesn't really support that, because we have Sasuke rivaling Weightless Lee, and then we have later Guy says that Lee would need the 3rd gate to beat Neji. So he's clearly not talking about Weightless Lee being unrivaled in speed, just Lee in general. And 5th gate Lee being unrivaled in speed is nothing to like scoff at. Lee's really fast. He's obviously faster than Gaara, Sasuke, and Neji. So it's not like that's an anti-feat for Gaara or an anti-statement for Neji.
Right.
But anyway, Sasuke keeps up with Gaara, or he's faster than Gaara, and he's just as fast as Weightless Lee.
Weightless Lee.
But then Neji, if you want to talk about this truth, you can. But Neji,
Um,
you can compare him more to gatedly, like third gate, maybe even further. But you can go.
Right.
Yeah. So this isn't as blatant in the Viz translations, but what the raw kanji and of the actual manga actually say, whenever a guy makes a statement about get Lotus and whatnot, he explains that the high speed combo is what's needed to beat Neji. The Viz translation completely takes this out. It just says this is what's needed to beat Gaara and like win the match. But the raws say that it's what's needed to beat Neji. That would mean that, obviously Neji should be faster than anything below the third gate, I would say, since the third gate is what's needed
Yep,
to
that's a fair deduction.
actually
I
use
agree.
the reverse Lotus.
Yep.
And you can make arguments for it actually being the fourth gate because the Lee he's commenting on is fourth gate Lee. So,
Yep.
there's obviously those arguments. So anything below those speeds, or I'm sorry, Neji should just be above a good margin.
I agree.
Yeah. So Neji, basically, the implication from this is Neji's faster than Gaara. He should be able to do similar things to him that Sasuke and Lee both did, if not to a greater extent because of the gentle fist. And then now we're going to talk about how, Neji's gentle fist will interact with Gaara's sand armor. And for the most part, Neji's just negging the sand armor. Like I don't even think there's anything Gaara can do. So
Yeah.
Neji tells us that chakra built substances just stand no chance against the gentle fist. He demonstrates this with Kidomaru, and Gaara's whole sand thing is just chakra built substances. So Neji,
Right,
in
I see what you're
theory
saying.
anyway, should be able to just break down the sand armor, hit Gaara's Tenketsu points, and put him down. At least in base. Now, a common refutation to this would be the fact that Kidomaru's gold skin prevents him from getting hit by the gentle fist. People are like, oh, that's a chakra built substance. It's not. It's just like something Kidomaru can do. It's not necessarily chakra based. It's like anatomy based on him. Sort of like a Kekkei Genkai, but I don't think it's a ninjutsu, so I wouldn't call it that. It's just something that whatever clan he's from, the 6-armed clan, I don't know, spider clan, they could do that. So that's not really a refutation. So Neji should be able to just completely
I might
break
disagree,
down
but
the sand armor.
it is
and,
debatable.
and
That's
bypass
for sure.
it, put Gaara down. But Gaara has, just like Naruto, a way to get around that with Shukaku. And Shukaku is way more willing to lend Gaara power than Kurama is to lend Naruto power. So if anything, Gaara would be out way less time than Naruto originally was. And then we know that Gaara can also access more Shukaku power than Naruto can access Kurama power. So when Gaara gets back up, him and Neji aren't going to be relative. He's going to be speed blitzing him basically.
Agreed. With that amp, I mean, come on.
So, I mean, at that point, Gaara can just take it even further. He can get a one tail. He can go like half transformation suit. He can go full Biju mode and shoot air blast at Neji. But whenever Shukaku comes out, Neji just stands no chance.
Agreed.
And then if you want, you can quickly wrap it up by talking about end of series, both of them. But I mean, I don't think it changes much.
Yeah, it doesn't really change much. It's kind of hard to compare. It's pretty easy actually. I don't know why I said that, but basically just that it's basically that Kidomaru just on a completely lower level than Kimimaru, which obviously Gaara was defending against, and he actually blocked his strongest attack, his strongest defense. So if Gaara wanted to use his strongest defense against end of series Neji is not getting past it. I'm sorry, Neji just isn't getting past it. For speed, it's also kind of easy. The sand got massively stronger. Gaara also obviously got massively stronger from the end of series from tuning exams. Even Lee says this, and we see him combating stronger opponents. Obviously, you have end of series Neji, who's having problems against people like Kidomaru. Even their combat style is kind of contradict, and obviously Kidomaru has an advantage due to his ability to get farther away, and Neji needs to be close to win. it's still something to note and something to show the comparisons and power of them.
Kidomaru also directly compares Neji to Kimimaru. Not saying that they're as strong as one another, because it's implied Kimimaru is stronger than the whole Sound 4 and just base, right? Like Kimimaru should be at least Jonin level in base, and the Sound 4 all lost to two out of chakra Jonin while they were in
Correct.
Curse Mark 2.
They're all
he should be
fatigued
way
and stuff
stronger
like that.
than them in base, even when they're in Curse Mark 2. And he says that Neji pushed him as far as Kimimaru did before. So Kimimaru in base can do what Neji did kind of just casually, right? And then Gaara obviously forced Kimimaru to go Curse Mark 2 whenever they were fighting. So that's just another like thing on
Empirically,
top.
yep, makes
Gaara
sense.
is stronger than Neji at that point. So quickly wrap everything up so everyone understands. In the training exams, Neji would probably beat base Gaara, but then when Gaara pulls out any Shukaku power, Neji's done for. And then at the end of the series, at the end of part 1 anyway, Neji just cannot win. Gaara is just simply superior. Subscribe to Truth or don't.
Great
care.
video, guys. Great scaling. Great logic as
And
always.
after that, subscribe to me too. Have a nice day.
All right, so definitely want to get my thoughts on this. So, again, this is a very contentious matchup. I agree with mostly everything Six and Truth said, but I think the idea of Neji bypassing Gaara Sand is a more complicated one than Six and Truth sought it out to be. I think that there is a possibility that he can't bypass the sand. Now, I think the Kidomaru feat, where Kidomaru was able to harden his body or whatever the case may be to avoid the gentle fist, is one that we should note. And the answer to whether or not he could bypass Gaara Sand isn't black and white to me. I think that's actually a very contentious topic. Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to give a deep analysis here, but I would simply say that it is debatable and very contentious. Now, the speed, it's pretty clear that Neji has superior speed, right? Gaara was already having somewhat trouble keeping up and keeping his eyes on weightless Rock Lee, if I'm not mistaken. So Neji going all out would definitely be faster than Gaara, that's for sure, right? That is for sure. However, he does have some advantages that Rock Lee didn't. He doesn't have that time limit, right? Using the gates, which takes a toll on Rock Lee's body to an increasing extent as he opens more and more gates. Neji doesn't have that issue. He's naturally that fast, right? And he has the gentle fist. So he has that advantage. He'd have more time in comparison to Rock Lee. His defense is better than Rock Lee's. He would use his palm rotation and probably deflect quite a bit of sand. However, Gaara's style isn't one that is very taxing or tedious. So he would have that advantage. Right? He would definitely have that advantage. So you could argue that if Gaara Sand does hold up to the Gentle Fist, if we don't presuppose that the Gentle Fist simply easily bypasses his sand, both defenses, the first and second layer, then there's a possibility that Gaara could just outlast Neji. There's that possibility as well. And that's only if he doesn't get enraged mid-battle and ends up using Shikaku to aid him. Because if that happens, Neji's done for. There is no battle anymore. It's a wash at that point. So here's what we can safely, rationally deduce based off the empirical evidence provided. Neji's faster than Gaara, and Neji has better defense than Rock Lee. We can establish those things, right, which are definitely advantages for Neji. Now, from my own subjective lens, as far as who wins, right, during the beginning of the Chunin exams, if they were to fight, I do lean towards Neji. And the reason I lean towards Neji is because he has superior speed, so he'd get past the first line of defense, like weightless Rock Lee or whatever exact gig did it. And then he'd have to deal with the last layer of defense, right? And I do think, from my subjective lens, because it's not provable 100%, that he would bypass that sand. I do think that he would bypass it, hit the right organs, and at the very least, chip away at it, right? He'd chip away at it similar to Rock Lee, and eventually there would be an opening, if anything, right? He has superior hand speed, clearly, to Rock Lee up until the fourth gate, more than likely. So he would chip away at it with his taijutsu, and eventually the layer would be thin enough to where the gentle fist would cause a reaction physically for Gaara, and Gaara would be done at that point. Or he would get enraged and Shukaku would come out, and that would be the end of that. So I do think Neji beats that specific version of Gaara. I do think more than likely he defeats him empirically. I think we have enough to deduce that based off the, I guess, anti-feats Gaara's had against other individuals, right? I do tend to believe that. Now, to get more specific, I don't think he has the same success right away that Sasuke did. I don't think he has anything with the AP of a Chidori like Sasuke did. I think he's going to have to chip away at it, like I said, right? Now, as time goes on, this fight is going to lean towards Gaara, right? Once we get to the end of the series, even in base without Shukaku, who washes Neji. Neji lost to Kidomaru, who I believe was stated to be, if I'm not mistaken, the weakest of the Sound Four. And Kimimaro, when he interacted with them, told them, I'll kill all of you if you don't do what you're supposed to do. Having casually let them know, I'll kill you all. No problem, right? And that was base Kimimaro. So we had Curse Mark II Kimimaro having trouble with Gaara. Yes, he was sick, but still, that's a much stronger Kimimaro than base Kimimaro. And that's a fact. So Gaara, at the end of the series, he increases by leaps and bounds, clearly, right? Neji was training as well, but we see empirically who had more success, and against who. That matters as well, right? We have Gaara's opponent being blatantly superior to Neji's opponent, and Gaara having more success than Neji. In fact, Gaara won, right? He won. Again, yes, Kimimaro was sick, but that doesn't negate the large gap between Kimimaro and the entire Sound 4 in its entirety. There's no way to refute that. There's no way to argue against it. It is what it is, right? That's empirical proof, and that's why empiricism triumphs over rationalism a lot of the times in fictional-based reality, because we have these empirical feats that have been presented to us. So we can only rationally deduce from what we see what would most likely take place. And another thing that I'm glad 6 always does, and Truth did here, is they pointed out the idea of semantics when it comes to canonical literature and statements, right? I'm glad they pointed out Neji versus Hinata, right? And the implication that some people make, right? This very strange rational deduction that somehow they're equal. No, they're not. Clearly, from the battle that took place, the only reason they were on par in that specific moment in time was because Neji allowed that to happen. He wasn't mentally amped. He wasn't bloodlusted. He was simply swapping hands with Hinata. And at the end, he made it blatantly clear that he's superior. The damage done on each side is not even close. There's nothing to imply relativity at all, remotely. Right? It's not even close. Neji is blatantly superior to Hinata. It's not even a competition whatsoever. He almost killed Hinata. If you remember correctly, the Jonins had to step in and save Hinata's life because Neji is that much more superior than Hinata. So this notion that Neji is somehow relative to Hinata or vice versa is just comical, clearly. It's much easier to prove the antithesis based off the very empirical evidence itself. It's much easier to prove Hinata is blatantly inferior to Neji. It's very blatant. It's very clear. It's clearly indicated by Kishimoto. Again, these data books, right? They have these statements. Not everything's hyperliteral. And to imply or go with that is clearly an appeal to ignorance, and I would also argue an appeal to authority, right? So an appeal to authority is taking everything hyperliteral just because the creator of such said manga said it, that it must be hyperliteral and only hyperliteral. The idea of a writer in his or her manga isn't biconditional. It's not. It's not if and only if. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to canonical literature. Why? Because writers want to establish lore. They want to establish a polarizing story, polarizing characters, etc. Which is why you have statements like Tamari's wind blew away the world, or whatever the hell it said exactly. Clearly, she's not anywhere near planet level, and definitely not universal or anything even remotely close to any of those levels. Clearly not. So we're not going to read that and take that hyperliteral and imply or claim that she's planet level. Clearly, she's not. She got folded by fucking Madara with an entire division behind her. And Madara was nowhere near planet level at that point. At best, he was around maybe continental. Nowhere near even small planet level at that point. That was Madara as an Edo. And he blew away an entire division. So you got to look at the empirical evidence and then use some common sense and rational deduction to come up with a good claim that holds logically, that's valid, and not this nonsensical notion that everything's hyperliteral. Everything said is hyperliteral always. No, that's not the case, right? So I'm glad 6 always reiterates that, because he's right. He's definitely right about that. But to conclude this video, I would say Gaara in base, up until obviously the end of the series, loses to Neji. Once you get towards the part where Sasuke gets kidnapped by the Sound 4, things change. Gaara increases by leaps and bounds, clearly by the very empirical evidence provided. Neji loses to the weakest of the Sound 4, and Gaara defeats an individual that would solo the Sound 4. No sweat. Especially when we take into consideration his interactions with the Sound 4. He literally tells them casually, I'll kill you all if I have to. So, there you guys have it, folks. This was very interesting. And again, this topic is very contentious. There is, at the bare minimum, decent arguments for both sides. Decent, I'd say. But I think 6 and Truth are on the right side of things for the most part, and I enjoyed the video. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I always read your comments, and yes, I do enjoy reading them, even if it goes against my own. Even if it's the antithesis of my own claim, I still enjoy reading your opinions on these extremely ambiguous topics and contentious topics. So that's gonna wrap it up, folks, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's J3 signing out. Peace.